Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me, bless his holy name.
Thanks so much for tuning in to Everything Catholic again. And just like before, I just want to thank all of you for taking a little bit of your time to be here with us. So I hope you are going to learn a lot from this one as well. And here's the table of content for your reference. I have put together 4 clips for the compilation this time. So without wasting any more time, let's start with the first one on the list.
When we recite the Our Father prayer, the ideal is to focus on what you say. It's not always easy because the devil likes to distract us in our thoughts. As an exorcist, as having worked with Father Amor for many years, it is not a secret that the devil cannot control or possess the human will, but he can the intellect and the memory. He doesn't always do that. That's a rarity, but he can, more often than not, enter your intellect and memory without your will, without your consent. But he can't do that with the will. So sometimes when we pray, like the Our Father prayer, we may have a distracting thought that we don't put there. It just comes by itself, or rather comes from the evil one, or it comes from something around us distracting us. And it is a good practice for us time to time to just say one prayer slowly every day, or a few times a week, to avoid the tendency to make prayers repetitive without any heart involved in them. Our Lady of Medjugorje has asked us to pray from the heart. And that's what praying from the heart is, focusing on what you're saying and meaning it with the heart. And therefore it's good, for example, to say the Our Father very slowly, or the Hail Mary, or the Glory Be. And there's a story I recounted once or twice in one of my talks of Saint Bernard, of him out on horseback. He was a 12th century French abbot, also a doctor of the church. And he was with a friend of his, and they were talking about prayer. And Bernard told his friend, it's very difficult for me to recite the Our Father prayer without being distracted. And his friend said, it's not difficult for me, it's very easy. Bernard said, well, I'll tell you what, if you can recite the Our Father prayer without being distracted, I'll give you my horse. He said, oh, you got a deal. He began to recite the Our Father prayer. And when he came to the words, give us this day our daily bread, he said, can I have the saddle too? So prayer sometimes can be a chore because you have to discipline yourself and not allowing your mind to go all over the place. The little flower, Saint Thérèse de Lisieux, said that the rosary was her penance. Now, some people, when I first read that, along with some people, they were taken aback, thinking, well, that's a little odd. You know, the rosary should be your meeting with God, a quality time of prayer. What I think she meant by that was not so much the rosary, but praying it in the community with the other nuns. Because whenever you pray in common, it's a little bit of a chore, because everyone has their own pace. And it becomes more of a distraction sometimes than an actual prayer. I know this because I pray every day with the priests here. And we have 2 priests that go at 2 different paces, 2 different rhythms. And then you have always one in the crowd in the Mass, during the Mass, that wants to control the tempo of the whole prayer, whether it's the Creed or the Our Father. They have to raise their voice the loudest, and one will rush through it, and another one will slow it down. And this is the penance, I think, when it comes to praying in community. So I don't adopt any of those approaches. I just sit back, I do it at a whisper, and let them battle it out, let them get distracted.
Moving on to the second clip in this compilation, it's going to be on discursive and contemplative prayer. Listen to this.
The mystical doctor, Saint Teresa de Jesus, Teresa of Avila, who talks of 2 types of prayer, discursive and contemplative. The discursive is common among, let's say, beginners, and the contemplative more among proficients. And she says that as the soul becomes more seasoned in prayer, it progresses from discursive to contemplative, but it never stops discursive prayer. Why? Because as human beings, being creatures of habit, we sometimes follow the flow of events surrounding us that condition our prayer, and we have to sometimes stop ourselves in our tracks and go back to the well, to where we started, and sometimes pray out loud to call our attention to what we're doing. Because if everything is contemplative, sometimes we can get distracted with that. It's impossible on earth to be continuously in a contemplative state. It's impossible. And God does not want that. Why? Because we have to face trials, struggles, setbacks, interior aridities, desolations, consolations, in order for us to grow. It's like a muscle. The soul is very much like a muscle. The soul is very much like a muscle in the sense that in order for the muscle to grow, it needs both resistance and rest. It needs to be strained by opposing forces, and then it needs to recover. If you're always opposing it, you tear down the muscle. If it's always resting, it atrophies. So there has to be a give and take in order for it to grow. Same with the spirit. And that give and take is discursive and contemplative. The discursive is you in the active mode of whether it's intercessory prayer or praying in tongues, praying in praise, praying deliverance. Contemplative is more passive, where now you're receiving. Not so much, let me put it this way. Prayer, which includes all types, the four I mentioned, namely tongues, praise, intercession, and liberation or deliverance, and contemplation, is the expression of my will. Worship is the acceptance of God's will. When we contemplate, we worship. So contemplative prayer and discursive prayer have to always be a staple in our lives. I think as we mature, contemplative prayer becomes more prevalent, but we never get completely rid of discursive. And the reason is simple, as I mentioned. We need to sometimes go back to the well and speak out loud to distract ourselves and call ourselves back to what we're doing. Because sometimes when we contemplate, the mind starts to flutter. And we have to focus on what we say and saying some things out loud. Speaking or praying out loud helps us call our attention back to what we're doing. And this is the practice of the desert monks. They call them javelins. They did short, not long, short prayers, but out loud. And this is something that we do when in between the rosary, like the Fatima prayer, or they're called aspirations, things like that.
And this one is something I've shared with you before, but it's worth sharing them again because the discussion has somewhat resurfaced in recent months.
Did you choose where you would be born? What country? It's impossible. Did you choose in what family you would have been born? Did you choose in what religion they would raise you? That's 3 no's. Is that your fault? That's 4 no's. Suppose you were born in a Muslim family. Now, is it wrong to obey the religion your parents raised you in as a toddler because you respect your parents? No, there's nothing wrong with that. You're a child. You do what you're told. There's a virtue in that. Why? Because Jesus says, well, God the Father tells Moses, obey your father and your mother. It's a commandment from the Christian world. So what's wrong with a Muslim or a Jew or a Hindu doing that? There is no fault in that. That's the first point I wish to make. Second, once the individual attains the age of reason, they begin to think, but they still need guidance. Now, normally in religions, they indoctrinate you in that religion, meaning the parents do to the child, due to no fault of the child. And the child will most definitely be influenced in its core in that religion because they're doing a virtuous thing by obeying the parents. As the child matures through infancy, adolescence, adulthood, it now attains the age of independence. In most countries, it's 18, 19, where they're on their own, they make their decisions, the parents are no longer their guardians. Now they can start to make their own choices. But up until this point, they've been indoctrinated. Now, God sees all this. He doesn't hold them responsible for all this obedience training. It's in that context that all people are children of God, okay? Now, are there truths in all these religions? Absolutely. Even Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger said this. Just go back to read his documents. He said even every heresy has a truth. Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger said that. Every heresy contains a truth. So much more, every religion contains a truth. But does that mean that all religions contain all truth? Of course not. The Pope never said that. They're pathways to the truth, meaning they contain some truth, but they have to be refined. Again, the individuals in that faith are not all responsible equally for that creed because they were raised in that. That's how God sees us. We just see the end result. They're Muslim, they're Jews, they're not in the full faith. That's not the way God sees them. We have to put on the lenses of Christ. And that's why Pope John Paul II, Pope Benedict XVI, Pope Francis went to Assisi in this ecumenical gathering where there was all these religions, not to syncretize and eviscerate the Catholic and bring it down to their level and say, oh, we're all the same. The popes never said that. They said they're pathways, meaning they're leading up to. And this is something that we have to cultivate. Consider, for example, Canon 844. Now, I know this addresses just Christians, but it brings within its sweep Protestants, Catholics, and Orthodox in one family. Canon 844 of the Code of Canon Law states that a Catholic minister, under certain conditions, can give the sacraments of confession, communion, and anointing of the sick to Protestants, to Orthodox, provided they meet certain conditions. Pope Ratzinger, well, Cardinal Ratzinger, before he was coronated pontiff, gave communion publicly in St. Peter's Square during the funeral of John Paul II to the Protestant founder of the Taizé community, Roger Schultz, before he was murdered in public. He gave it to a Protestant. So God looks at our history first, and then he looks at our condition in the present. If someone approaches, say, a person and says, here's the saving truth of Christ, naturally there may be a little bit of resistance because they were raised with a different mentality. And this is where patience and charity come in. If they're approached the right way, we may win them over. And this happens. There's a community called Jews for Christ. They were Jews once. They still keep their Jewish heritage, but they embrace Christ as the Messiah. They still celebrate Hanukkah. They still do their things because they're still part of the Jewish community and family as well.
And for the last clip that I want to share with you in this compilation, it's going to be this. For those of you who are still here listening and watching, thanks again from the bottom of my heart for your time.
With respect to justice and mercy, we live in an unjust world. And we know that because Jesus told us in advance that they will persecute you. If you serve the cause of Christ, you will be persecuted. No servant is greater than his master. If they did this to me, they will do this to you. And there's no way to heaven except through the cross. But we also know that even though we're aware of these teachings, we're never fully prepared for unexpected setbacks. Much like the Blessed Mother when her son was being led across the dirty streets of Jerusalem to the crucifixion. Even though she knew this, Simeon prophesied it to her, it's a whole different thing to experience it. Right? And it depends, I suppose, on the person, their age, the event that they're experiencing, and our relation to them in order to counsel them. It has to be taken in the proper context. But in general, I could say this, that we only see things from below and don't always comprehend the events in our lives and why God permits them to happen, especially when they are unjust. The example that Padre Pio gave to a person who was experiencing the death of a loved one was this. When your grandmother or your mother is working with a needle and thread and you're sitting at her feet and you look up at her and all you see are the strings hanging from below the canvas she's working on. And you say to her, you've been working on that for days and all I see is a bunch of yarn and strings hanging. And then after she finishes it, she turns it around and then you realize the masterpiece because she sees from above what you see from below. And that's why Christ tells us that blessed are those who have seen who believe without seeing. This he said to Thomas. Thomas wanted to know the answers all now. And we can't, I think we are too harsh on Thomas, We call him the doubting Thomas, but he had reason to doubt. I don't think any one of us wants to have a spiritual relationship without knowing our spouse. Thomas wanted to meet his bridegroom. Christ said, with respect to the apostles when he was criticized by the Pharisees for not fasting, as long as the bridegroom is with them, they cannot fast. So when all the apostles saw Christ, except Thomas, he wanted to see his spouse in the spiritual sense of the word. And therefore, when we are experiencing these setbacks, we want to know the reason. We want to understand, and there's nothing wrong with that. Our Lady wanted that at the Annunciation when she was told to be the Mother of God. She said, how? How is it possible? She wanted to know too. And there's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes we don't always have the full answer. We have part of the answer, which I just started with. We have to live by faith. There will be crosses to get to heaven. But to deal with that is a different thing. The best thing to do for that person is to Be there for them. Not so much talk to them, just be there for them. Sometimes your presence is more than a conversation, than a lesson. As humans, sometimes we go into teaching mode all the time, and sometimes it gives you spiritual indigestion. You just want to say, can you just be quiet and stop teaching me and just listen? Sometimes these people that are hurting need to talk. They need to express, and you need to be there just to listen and not give them any advice, not counsel them, just listen. Sometimes that's more important, more consoling than, even though you have all the best effort to help them, speaking and teaching.
Well then, that will be all for the video this time. And as always, thank you so much for taking the time to be here again, and hopefully all of you have learned a lot from this video. Remember, if there's any feedback or suggestion, please let us know in the comments below. Anyway, if you like what we do and you'd like to support us, I left a link to our PayPal donation in the description box below and from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much for your continuous support, contributions, and prayers. And until the next one, thanks again for watching and may God bless you.
Man, I don't know who they think I am. I make minimum wage over here, man. I ain't dying for this.